It's in my eye. Hi, Teria. Welcome to Guild Chat. Happy Friday. I'm your host, Ruby, and today we're going to be talking to a whole lot of members of our cinematics team about making these cinematics that go into our game and our episode trailers that go out to you guys. So we have a whole lot to talk about. We'll get right into it. I'll let the three of you introduce yourselves and talk about what you do for cinematics.
All right. Hi. Well, my name is Chelsey, and I am the cinematics director. It's an overview of what my responsibilities are. So I manage the team in both kind of craft development and career management.
Also
Yeah.
that. Da-Hee, how about you?
I'm Da-Hee. I've been on this show before, but I'm a cinematics animator, so I make our characters and creatures and whatnot move. And I also do storyboards for the team. So
I'm Greg, cinematics artist. Do pretty much from previs all the way through the end of the cinematic. So
Awesome. All right, so you guys are group one. We have another group coming up later from our cinematics team, but there are two categories of cinematics. Let's kind of start with that. In-game cinematics and then out-of-game, like the marketing trailers, like the episode trailers that we give to all of you. So can you kind of walk us through the difference between those to get us started?
Yeah. So the team develops both the in-game cinematics that support the Golden Path story that we see in the Living World episodes, and we also support marketing with the episode trailers. So you'll get to talk to Jason later, who is the main point person for making those trailers. The difference in their development more is about what is the outcome we want from these cinematics. So the in-game cinematics are about, supporting the story, making sure the whole Golden Path is impactful the whole way through. And the marketing trailers is to get fans really excited for the upcoming episode, give a little tease, give that information, and it's a way to connect with, everyone who plays the game.
Yeah, kind of let people know what's coming too.
Yeah.
All right, so for this segment, we're going to be focusing on in-game cinematics.
Yep.
And it's turning into like a flowchart, but there are two kinds of those too, right?
Yes, there are. And then you could even branch off further from there. So
We won't. It'll be okay.
So stylistically, there's the painterly cinematics, and then there's the 3D cinematics. I'll just call them the 3D cinematics.
Sure, that works.
And the basic general difference between those two, at least it started to develop, I would say, in season 2, that it was a story choice to have the illustrated cinematics be more about the past or a prophecy, and the 3D cinematics were about the present. So anything happening there with the commander was what you would experience in that 3D, because it matches what you see in game. And then from the 3D cinematics, you get branching. Do you want me to talk about?
Yeah,
So, because the illustrated always has to be pre-rendered. There's not a good way for that to be runtime, because a lot of the assets are already, pre-baked animation sequences.
Sure.
The 3D cinematics can either be runtime cinematics or pre-rendered cinematics. And I know there's some questions later on those.
Yeah.
I could dive into that now, or we could dive further into it later.
Let's go into it a little bit, and if you have more questions that we don't address during the show, you can ask questions in chat at the end of each segment, and we'll take some of those, as many as we have time for. So yeah, go ahead and address a few of those now.
So the runtime versus pre-rendered. In general, runtime is a little bit more crisper. Like, people have noticed visually that it matches their graphics, because it's just pulling from the engine and setting up the camera and telling the characters to be in this place. It usually is a lot. There's some downstream considerations we have to take into factor when doing runtime, because it's more of a heavy lift on audio, it's a heavier lift on design, and especially QA. Because the moment, let's say, one art asset we brought into the cinematic changes, or its path has changed, and it's not caught till the end, because it could be a last minute thing that needed to happen, it could break the whole cinematic, and it could stop someone from advancing in the episode.
Okay.
So, there's a lot of those considerations to think about when we want to do runtime, and just make sure downstream teams are aware of this additional time we have to kind of focus on that.
Sure.
Versus pre-rendered, I'm going to have kind of Jason explain more about what codecs we use and the software involved, but pretty much it is a, we render it out from the engine, but then we do have to kind of compress it to make it into a video that we put into the game. But it's usually a safer package because it doesn't have downstream team
Sure.
scope concerns.
Okay. All right. That helps clear that up a little bit.
Yep.
So why don't we just kind of walk through the process of making one of these in chronological order? Does that work? And you guys actually brought along a lot of cool images and videos to kind of explain that. So I have this. We can just kind of run through those whenever you are ready.
Okay.
All right. So where do we start?
Well, let's start with the first stage, which is talking to narrative about what is a good cinematic moment for the episode, and also coordinating with design. When is a good moment to have that story moment play out? You know, when you want to get closer with the character and see more of that emotional moment versus it being a gameplay moment. So I'm usually in initial meetings with narrative and design. Once we get a little more of a solid feeling for what the cinematic shall be, I will either bring in like Greg or Da-Hee, depending on like who wants to do like storyboards or just go right into the previs, make sure that like scope concerns are not, you know, something to consider when a moment is being developed into a cinematic.
Sure.
Once we are greenlit for that script, I usually will hand off the script to, you know, Greg or Da-Hee, depending if, you know, storyboards or not, and I'm going to kind of let them take it from there.
Okay.
So
Surprise!
let's do. Well, I could do the. Well, no. Talk about storyboards.
Okay. I don't know what you want to know about storyboards. I create them. So usually, I don't know if we. Yes.
Yes.
Perfect.
Here you go.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I don't know
You
how
have
to
the
use
power.
this. Oh boy. Okay, so this is actually an example of Kate's branding. It is completely incomprehensible. Basically, I took the script, I read through the script, I decided like these are the key moments that I really want to hit, and I'll usually go from the top of the script to all the way to the bottom, just scribble out like, and I think this is how the camera should be here, and what it should be here, and how they would cut into each other, and what the characters are roughly doing. I've actually considered like trying to pitch that initial first pass to Chelsey and the rest of the team, and then I like took a step back and like looked at that sketchbook page and went, I can barely read this, so yeah.
But it starts the process of getting your thoughts down on paper, so to
Yes,
speak.
absolutely. Because if I start with just like this, we just had it up.
Yeah.
Wait, come
But so you know, after that initial stage of just scribbling in my sketchbook, I will go into sort of like these thumbnails. I have tried just starting from here before, and every time it is like this paralysis of staring at a blank canvas and going, how do I
don't
even
know.
start?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, after I do the sketchbook mess of spaghetti, then I'll do thumbnails. I will go and pitch them to usually to Chelsey, and whoever else needs to be in that meeting. She'll give me notes. I'll go back to the drawing board, do it again, and you know, et cetera, until we arrive at boards that I then hand off to a layout artist like Greg.
Hi.
Hello.
Do I
You-
get
I don't.
this thing now?
Yes.
Does it control anything?
I don't know what it does, but I liked having it in my hand.
Yeah, so Da-Hee does storyboards, and we start planning it out in engine, basically. I think we have an early kind of prototype that just uses rough assets that aren't finished and kind of in the world, so we can show that.
Yeah, let's take a look at that to get context.
It's all right. Speak through me.
Kate! No!
I am not him.
So
Okay,
yeah,
that was
so
different.
that was that was the very early previs. That the purple dragon eventually turns into Arene. The kind of silly animations on Kaith are just to try and get an idea of what is happening, just canned effects that are already in the game. We just throw it all together to try and get the feel and be able to kind of pitch it to the other teams to say, here's what we're thinking, here's where we want to go with it.
I noticed Keith looked a lot different than she wound up as.
Yeah, yes, definitely. I mean, it goes
creepier.
through iterations, character team, creature team, work on all that stuff. So it's a very collaborative process. Yeah. And so I think we have a couple other of the process we can show.
Yeah,
if
why
you
don't we
want.
go ahead and let's look through you just want to look through like all 3 or 4 of the progressive ones at once and then we can talk about it?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, sweet. Let's do that.
It's all right. Speak through me.
Keith!
I am not him.
Yeah.
It's all right. Speak through me.
Keith!
I am not him.
So as you can see, it progressed a lot from the first one already. There's a lot more polished animation in there, but more animation to do. The effects are still old effects that'll get switched out. And the area, the map is still being worked on at this point. So there's a lot of work that's gone into it. This is probably easily a month of work, maybe more at this point, and we probably still have a month or so left to go, I would guess, on this.
Do we have that flow chart of
We do.
if we
Yeah.
could show that. So the videos that we just showed goes basically all the way through until, would you say final layout or rough layout?
No, that is, I mean, it blends together. I would say that is mostly final layout. There's probably camera tweaks that still happen and that sort of stuff.
Right.
And some of the map that comes together, but it's pretty close to like what the shots will be at the end.
Yeah. So go
even
ahead.
rough layout has like this huge whole separate flowchart.
Yeah. Production is like its own thing, but
So let me walk through this if I
Yeah.
can.
Yeah,
please.
Now that we've seen some examples, there's a nice visual tie-in to kind of like the whole production. So pre-production is, we talked about the script, we saw the storyboards, we saw kind of like that animatic that had some of the in-game, animations that Greg just put together as a proof of concept. We have the rough layout. Then we go into that mocap rehearsal. We're getting the raw mocap in. And then can we get to the next flow chart that has production? So production, even though it's sharing kind of like, it looks small, this is actually like the most meaty part of the cinematic because it's just a lot of back and forth iteration. So as animation is getting into its polish, and it's a constant review loop that Greg and Da-Hee can touch on later, there's always camera adjustments happening. Usually you don't do final cameras until your body animation is done. And it's the layout artist just wants to make sure that, like, let's say the animator wants more room in the scene to lift up the character. They stand up from the chair, and the camera initially just framed the character sitting in the chair. Well, then now the layout artist and animator are going, okay, so I'm going to have the character stand up because there's this emotional beat that makes sense for them to stand up, and then the camera is going to get adjusted to follow that character up. Or you do a second cut, but usually it feels better if it's just like a flow up. If we go back to the chart, so that is a very lengthy process. While that's happening, like our assets are getting polished or changed, like visual effects. We saw like the model for Aureen and Kaith are different. Those are still getting finalized. And at the same time, like audio, we are, in touch with audio. We also were back in pre-production. We have to start scoping out any like story sound effect moments, what the music should be. And, Chris can speak more to that later, how that ties in. So while we're in production, those are getting polished as well. And the music is, getting different passes to see how it fits in there. When we get to post, and again, this is, for the second group, they'll go in more detail. But if we go back to that flow chart, post-production is once we have the final render, and we're going to see this when we're done talking about the flow chart, we get the final render, then it has to be localized, final audio has to be implemented, and then put into the game, and then QA testing.
Yeah. And just by the way, I color coded that so that all the red sections, all the red boxes, is stuff that our team does, specifically the cinematics team. Everything else that's not red is other teams. So, like there's a lot that happens that our team is not directly responsible for.
Yeah, but you're working with other teams, and it's
Right.
not just, hey, cinematics will just knock this thing out. We'll just like fraps it or something. And
Right.
yeah.
It's a hugely collaborative process, and
Yep.
there are a lot of cogs that have to move together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, do you want to look at the final render now?
Let's
So
do
then,
it.
after
Let's do
all
it.
this time, we get to final render.
Yes.
It's all right. Speak through me. I am not him.
So good, you guys.
So, yeah, obviously it's a lot more polished. The effects are done, music, sound, all of that is in there. Environment's done, so it's looking amazing. So
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So that's a part of getting it from beginning to end. And there are other directions that you guys can go with this. Do you want to talk about mocap a little bit? Because
Oh yeah.
we've been making use of that.
Mhm.
And you brought some really good videos.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
They're pretty amazing.
Yeah, I don't know. It's the way most of the game is hand keyed, and so mocap is more of a tool.
Let me stop you for a second and have you talk a little bit about what hand keying is.
yeah.
Go for it.
So when Chelsey says hand key, she's talking about kind of, I don't know, more of your what people would think of like traditionally. No, hold on. If I say traditional animation,
Sorry.
people are gonna think 2D animation, and that is not what this is, obviously. But it's like, I do not know how to explain this in not technical terms, but I'll do my best. But
Okay.
it's, for instance, if I'm gonna like wave hello, right? When we say that's gonna be hand keyed, you have a pose here, down here where my hand is just resting, and then you're gonna have a pose up here where I'm actually hit the peak of my wave. And then there's all this stuff that happens in between, like how am I going to bring my hand up? Is my wrist going to do this? Is it going to be more like this? Like there's all this stuff. So when you hand key it, you're literally like doing a pose here, doing a pose here, doing a pose somewhere in between here, and you're messing with all these curves, and it's a whole process.
You're going in there and you're physically making every bit of that flowing motion happen.
Right, exactly. Whereas with mocap, we bring in captured data of an actor doing this. There are a lot of skills that are shared between the two. Like at the end of the day, you are an animator. You have to make this animation sing, and that requires a lot of the same skills between hand key and mocap. It's just a different process and different like way of thinking about it. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times when we work with mocap, it comes in imperfectly, so there's a lot of cleanup that has to happen. There's also, it comes in fairly stiff, and so us as animators, we have to really loosen up the body and the hands and the head and make it feel good, really.
So this is the program that we use to capture and clean up like completely raw data. So this is not even like on our models or anything like that. It's just like points
in space.
Right, points in space. So kind of without getting too technical, because I honestly do not know the technical details of this, but from what I can understand, we have all these cameras in like an oval, and they are blasting light. And we have these like little reflective balls attached to various points on the actors. It's like basically just a Velcro suit.
They're markers.
Yeah.
Yeah, that have a reflective material on them.
Right,
and
exactly. Oh, when we talked to the mocap guy who actually like, he works for the company that creates all this equipment. He said that.
What part of the game is this?
Stay tuned.
No, don't say that. Don't say that. No. This is just one of us like having fun, playing around, fooling around, having a good time.
Just seeing how the mocap works, really.
Yeah, exactly. And God, I think there's so for people who don't know in the audience, our team does all of the mocap. We are our own.
Yeah,
mocap
we are the
actors. Exactly. It saves on money. It's just kind of a nice way for us to control the creative process, and it's just like easier to.
There's a lot of iteration that happens, and so it's much easier to just be able to go down there and iterate one day and then go down there the next day and do it again, rather than having to try and call someone in all the time.
Because our mocap studio is here in the building. It's just downstairs.
It's like literally downstairs. Yeah. But yeah, anyway, so I was talking to that mocap person, and he says that the reflective material is literally just like teeny tiny pieces of glass suspended in like some sort of substrate. So,
really?
Yeah, I don't know if anyone's
so we
curious.
should
I thought it was really cool, but
not eat the markers.
I don't think you should have eaten them even if
don't
they didn't have glass in them.
but like, if there's now we know the glass can't eat them.
Sure.
I have a new thing I'm scared of from our
Yeah.
earlier conversation.
Yeah. Please don't.
Okay,
eat
so
the mocap markers. We need those.
no, don't eat them anyway.
Yeah.
I don't care what they're made of. That took such a weird turn, you guys. Okay, so we've got the markers, basically a Velcro suit.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
And that's kind of a process in itself, like starting with rehearsal.
Yes.
Perhaps in the hallway by the kitchen.
Yeah.
We have video.
We do.
Do you want to see?
Sure.
You gave it to me. You can't look at me like
Emilio gave it.
Oh.
Okay, but you approved it. I was there when you said it was okay. Just saying.
All right.
Let's see.
The rift stalker on our tail.
Mother?
The rift stalker, Graham. We can't let it get away.
I personally think you look cool as hell. So.
Close enough. We have to take it down.
And you want to call action?
And action. Stay alert. We've got a rift stalker on our tail. Mother? This is rift stalker, Graham. We can't let it get away. What's that? Yeah. You want her to say it right after she comes out, or you want her to turn around and get set first?
As she's coming out. That
Okay.
way it makes it easier for time later because she's ready in action.
Yeah. I can get set to take him out, right?
Yep.
So there's once you, as soon as you come through the mist, I think.
Very nervously checking out everything in the background.
Ah.
Okay, so where is this just like, let's just see what this might look like. I have a random bow under my desk because reasons.
I do archery.
Chelsey, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That doesn't explain why you have the bow in the office.
I don't
For
know if it was
this
in the office. I made
cinematic.
that up.
It is in the office. It's under desk.
It's still there. I just
Oh,
haven't
cool.
taken it home yet. Because I have another boat
She never
home that
will.
I actually use. This is. Anyways, so that was for Air's return, and we just wanted to, see like how would the scene look, with Air coming out of the portal. some of the mechanics of like holding the bow. You know, of course, like my footwork was, anyways, I could, but
You are your own worst critic.
always. But it's good to kind of just like get a sense for like what the scene is. It saves time because like if you're going in hand keying everything, usually, you know, a lot of that would have to be fleshed out more in storyboards
Right.
versus just getting people down there and like, let's act this out. Let's get this, you know, figured out from that kind of staging sense.
Right. And also the great thing about mocap, I mean, so as an animator, like obviously hand key animation is very fun and that's what I learned in school and whatnot. But at the same time, like the way that mocap should be viewed, in my opinion, not to like get on a soapbox, but it
This
really
is your soapbox. Go.
it really helps save time in terms of like if a person is walking across a screen, like walk cycles take a really like they can take a while to do, especially if you know you're changing the pace of the walk. Like if someone's slowing down just really subtly to like look at something on the ground before they, you know, maybe they start walking a little bit faster because the thing they saw on the ground was not something they wanted to see. You know, all of that to hand key it would take a lot of effort. But we essentially get like the timing and some of the body mechanics of that for free, you know, free in mocap. It's not free. You have to rehearse it, you have to capture it, you have to go down, put on the suit, put the markers on, all this stuff, and then clean it and
Stop
It's not
Chelsey
free.
from eating them.
yeah, stop Chelsey from eating the markers.
I won't now because they're made of glass.
Okay, well, I'm glad I did.
Man.
Glad we.
I'm
got
gonna
some-
tell you about other things made out of glass that you shouldn't eat. Anyways, but yeah, mocap is just really, really useful.
It's another tool in the toolbox.
Exactly.
And both of you have been mocap actors.
Yes, yes. Got my first chance with our newest thing
Thing.
Oh, really?
that I'm not gonna talk
Thing.
about.
That's it.
But
Greg,
hang on to that.
yes. But Greg, you've been Brahm.
Yeah.
Really?
Logan and
Mm-hmm.
a little bit
Logan.
of Ritlock and
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's extremely cool.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, as an animator myself, also, it's like I prefer to act things out anyway, and so I think it's just it's a very natural process, I guess, to do mocap, and it's been fun doing it. So
Yeah. You'll see
Yeah.
some of Greg's acting in the episode 6 trailer when the next team come and walks through that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. I was like, wait, we have that. Where was? Oh, it's
We do?
later.
Yeah, later.
coming up.
All right. So once you've got it captured, you've put the capture suit on, you've got all of that. What happens then?
Oh my god. Okay.
Okay.
So
Iterations.
well, I mean, no,
Yeah.
hold on. We have other steps before we even start animating. So we have the raw data. The raw data, the way that we capture the data, like I mentioned, is shadow light, the little markers reflect it back, and you know the cameras will capture its position in 3D space. Every now and then, markers will not be seen by enough cameras. So, you know, if you're clasping your hand like this, then the markers on your wrist will not be seen by the cameras.
They're Velcro and they fall off sometimes.
Yes, they're Velcro and they fall sometimes. Sometimes we have characters who need to fall on the ground and then their entire back markers are gone.
Oh
Not
no.
that happened. It did happen.
That
But
sounds like a story I need to hear at some point.
yes. So when you have gaps in the data like that, you need to go in and essentially like use different kinds of math essentially to predict or to guesstimate where they
Sure,
might have been
yeah.
at that time. So it's really confusing because mocap cleanup can refer to a couple different things, but like when we're talking about raw mocap data cleanup, that is what we're talking about. We're cleaning up all these little gaps and like little weird hitches. Like every now and then, if your arm is like passing across your chest, then the cameras will think, or the program will think, your wrist marker is your chest marker for like half a second, and it looks really, really
Really?
funny. So, you know, that cleanup is something that I and one of our tech artists, Val, we do that most of the time. And then afterwards, we will, what we say, retarget. So we'll take all the little dots that you saw in that video with the raw mocap data and basically like line it up to a model and then put the data on that rig and then take that rig and put all that animation data into our GW2 rigs. It's a whole long process, is all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's not just, okay, this magically turns into Bram now.
No, it's like this is dots, and then dots become a gray dude, and then gray dude becomes Bram.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even then, after it becomes Bram,
Yes.
Then the
There's
real
that-
work starts.
Oh,
cycle.
okay, Greg.
I mean, the much longer work starts.
well, it's but like no,
Yes.
the,
We know what you meant.
Yes.
in the flow chart when it says animation polish review, and it has a cycle. That's
I mean, that's literally 2 months. It's like 2
Yes.
months of that
Yeah.
cycle going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. It's,
Oh, jeez.
yeah.
I don't know. I've been talking a lot, Greg. You want to talk about our
Yeah, so what's that
animation
like?
cleanup?
What's the real work that you were referring to?
The work that takes longer, that's the hard work that Da-Hee and Val do, is like cleaning up the dots and figuring out what dots are supposed to go where. But then the animation that Da-Hee and I do takes months, basically, where we if we have to have a character point, like Da-Hee was talking about before, then maybe someone wants the point to be like this, maybe someone wants the point to be like this, and so we go through rounds of feedback of what looks best and what makes sense with the character. And obviously the point is a very simple example. You think about an entire cinematic and extrapolate that out, it becomes a very long process of feedback, what works for the character, and fixing things, basically. So making it look pretty.
And then
Right.
the face,
Oh,
because that
gosh,
does
yeah.
not come in with the
Right.
mocap data.
Right. We do not do. So there is such a thing as like facial capture, but we do not do facial capture here. All of our facial animation is hand keyed, and so stuff like cloth and tails and like little. Sometimes like we have some hair controls if we're lucky or unlucky, depending on how you think about it. Ears, for instance, on Asura, we all need to hand key those because you can't capture motion data of like Asura ears. That would be pretty bonkers if we could.
I didn't think about that. That is, even those tiny little things, hand keying that, because we don't have a literal Asura down there with markers on the
Right.
tips of their ears.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Oh, that's actually a really nice detail. So the beauty of mocap data is that just because of the way that we because of the pipeline, we can take a regular sized human being like you or me and put that data on an Asura, and it looks fairly convincing. I mean, there's a lot of adjustment that we need to do to Asura, and or like we could even put the data on our char, and like absolutely there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, especially because char have like such long necks, and their posture is very different from how just human body posture naturally is. But the data still will get us, I don't know, like 50% there.
Yeah. Still gives us mechanics and timing and that sort of stuff that all
Right.
needs to be adjusted, but it gets us somewhere.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So who does the adjusting? Is that just a collaborative process, or is that like you going in there and saying, okay, this is what the neck is like?
Yeah.
No.
I mean, that is like what Da-Hee and I do, basically,
Yeah.
is the adjustments of how the characters are supposed to move and what they look
Right.
like and stuff.
Right. And sometimes mocap data can be very janky and like do all sorts of stuff, and we'll clean that up. We'll I think Greg mentioned earlier that sometimes mocap data, or oftentimes it will be very stiff, especially in the spine. And human spines are like very flexible and they're very expressive, and we don't always get that in our motion capture data. So we will add that back in. Fingers, we don't get finger
fingers
data.
also.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know, just really, really little thing. Like it could be as big as the entire mechanics of how the spine moves, and like there's sometimes we need to add a lot of weight back in, especially for our Norn characters. They're very big, they're very heavy, and we don't have a literal like
Norn.
500-pound,
Yeah.
like 8-foot tall person in the studio. Maybe we do.
No,
Don't.
I feel like we would have noticed.
We
Yeah.
probably would have noticed. But like there is a way that a 500-pound, 8-foot tall person moves that just can't be replicated by someone who, for instance, like me, I'm 5'3". Like
Yeah.
it just can't happen. So we'll add the weight back in, and and whatnot. And that is like, it's a really long process. It takes a long time. And then on top of that, all the faces, the cloth, the tails, all of that.
Yeah.
The facial takes a long time. If you think about, we have to basically move the lips and the eyes and all of that stuff individually. And so every word that you say, just word itself, is at least 3 different mouth shapes that you have to do, just word. And then you think about all of that through each of the cinematics. Facial becomes a very big part of what we do, and the expressiveness of the eyebrows and cheeks and all that sort of stuff. So.
Right. And when GW2 was first created, the characters were not ever envisioned to ever need incredibly expressive faces. That was something that we decided was something that we wanted to do later on.
Yeah, that came later.
Yeah, so it's been a long process of getting our faces up-res a little bit, adding more controls so that we can make those mouth shapes and like make the eyes really expressive, and so that we can avoid as much like uncanny valley as we can. Yeah.
Thank you on behalf of everyone.
Yeah.
Can
Can you imagine a Sura with like uncanny valley?
Stop. No.
I'd just be like,
Actually, I'm just sitting here thinking, how many of you were sitting at your computer just now going, word, word, and just focusing so hard on what your face was doing?
yeah.
I know some of you were doing that.
Like literally, that is sometimes what I'll do
That's-
at my
that's what
desk.
we do.
You just,
Yeah.
I have a little like tripod thing for my phone, and I will take reference video of myself saying like, cocoa nuts, coconut, just
Just to see how that works.
Yes, it's very funny.
Oh, wow. All right, so that's. I feel like I can't say that's all the process to getting it to live, because even now you're just kind of skimming and touching on the high level stuff, aren't you?
Right.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot. How long does all this take?
About average is 4 months right now. Something like Joko's, we call it Joko's victory when,
It was not.
Are we allowed to do
Spoilers.
spoilers?
Yes, Mark, you
It's
want
been
to do
long
the
enough. Is that really a
Spoiler warning.
You don't
spoiler?
have to. I just wanted
I
to be
don't know.
prepared.
For
if you
season
chose
4,
to.
episode 3. Episode 3, right?
Yeah, but maybe someone hasn't played through it yet.
If you haven't played through it, you need to play through it.
Spoilers.
while you're
Stop
watching
listening
this.
for a minute. Oh, Mark found it. Okay.
Great.
That's okay.
I just want to make sure. All right,
Yeah.
so cinematic where Joko has the commander tied up and then Irene comes in and eats him. That was about a 8 to 9 month cycle. We were able to hop on that one early, and it shows the more time we can get to make these cinematics.
God, you guys, it was so good.
Yeah, the
Well,
more.
part of the reason that it was so long also was that was actually the first cinematic that we used mocap for. And
Yes.
so figuring out that new pipeline and how we go about doing that was also part of the process. But it is a very high quality cinematic, and it took a lot of time.
It's 2.5 minutes.
Right.
Our average is about a minute and a half. So 2.5 minutes is it clocks at one
It's
of
a
the
long
longer
time.
ones.
Right. And also part of maybe a very, very small reason, or part of the reason why it took so long, is because we really wanted to have the player character in
Right.
that cinematic, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
That adds a whole other dimension, doesn't
Yes,
it?
it
Player
does.
character is tough.
yeah.
Much.
So
Uh,
for if I can speak to that
yeah.
real quick. So for that one, it's funny. That was the first assignment that I ever did for the cinematics team. I was still an intern on a different team at the time, on our gameplay animation team. But they wanted someone to really quickly just do a frozen pose in the air of each race and gender of the commander. So my animation lead said, "Here, this seems like a great task for an intern. Go familiarize yourself with our player character rigs."
Yeah, it's a good learning opportunity.
Yeah, it was good. I would say if I had to do that now, it would not have taken as long as it did, but as an intern, it took a little while. And if you can imagine, that is just a static pose, essentially.
Yeah, the commander's just in that bubble, frozen.
Right, exactly. And there's a little bit of drifting and whatever, but it's just it's a very simple thing. Compared to, for instance, with the last cinematic that we had, the finale of season 4, this probably actually deserves a spoiler alert. But
Oh, yeah.
yeah, the commander was in that final cutscene as well, and they were actually doing stuff and moving and whatnot.
But as you can imagine, I mean, in our game, the player, you can customize him or her to to be what you want, basically. So we have to deal, in the cinematics team, we have to deal with different heights, how high, how short they are, armor sizes, if they're bulky or not. And so that really affects like how the camera can be positioned. For example, an over-the-shoulder shot of a char won't work on an Asura. It's too small.
Yeah, Sora will be completely
Not
out of
in frame at all.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
Right.
So you have to make multiple cinematics then for each character, basically.
Right.
Well, and
each
imagine even
race.
down to like a light armor, very willowy Sylvari versus a heavy armor Char or Norn.
Right.
Right,
That's
right.
part of
Is
testing that
wildly
we have to
different.
do. and
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just imagine, even if you can keep the camera in the same place, how much more frame space that they're going
Yeah.
to take up, Sometimes we want the camera closer in on the commander so they're bigger on the screen. Well, if we get in too close on a chart, the camera's going to go through their body. But if we're too far away on an Asura, they won't be this foreboding like presence on the screen that they want them to
Right.
be, or that we want them to be. So, and even if we don't adjust cameras, you still need to have
do
multiple
separate
scenes,
cinematics.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So it just player character always creates a problem for us. We try to put them in there when we can, but it's a lot more work.
Right.
So that's
right.
where Emilio and I come in, and you guys will meet Emilio here shortly. And we have to make the hard decisions of balancing that against delivering on time and shipping
Right.
on time.
Yeah.
Uh,
Because time and workload are a thing that you always have to consider.
Yes, and the player character, just some quick math out there, will create 10 times the animation work, 10 times the audio implementation work, 10 times the game design implementation side of it, and then 10 times QA has to test this
And
scene.
that's not hyperbole. This is the
Literally.
literal
Literally,
number.
Literally.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're not
So-
just like, oh, it's kind of a lot. It's
Yeah. And I could go into faces, but the faces is more than 10 times. But I don't want to pull out that number. So
it's a lot.
it's a lot.
Right,
and
because if you think about it, we have so many customization options for the face. I mean, for the entire character.
Yeah.
But like all those little sliders, y'all, like it's a lot of options that we could do on the face. And
Yeah.
for instance, let's say we want a character to look like surprised. We want your commander to like do a surprise face. There are some people who have characters with eyebrows that are up here. So if we stretch it like any further up, they're gonna go like off their face, So it's a lot of things to juggle and to think about when we're not only scheduling, but if we put this facial animation on the commander, is it going to read exactly the way we want it to read for
Right.
every single possible face that people can make?
yeah.
Which is a lot.
So
Yeah.
we try to save it for really special moments, just like, is it illustrated versus 3D? Okay, well, what's the story beat moment here, right? And then, like, when can we try to put the commander in against the schedule we're running? And so, like, Joker's Victory, it's like, could we do this? Yes, let's do it. The end of Season 4, could we do this? Yes. But both of those had early start times. So, like, even
you
the...
had lots more time.
Yeah, what we call, I don't know, we did the spoiler. Anyways, end of Season 4, cinematic, again, that was also about an 8-month cycle, if not 9-month cycle to work on.
Yeah, and the thing that you were saying about you and Emilio, the director and the producer have to come in and make that decision.
Yes.
Because you could technically say, okay, yes, we want to, this is the player. We want to get the commander in there in all of his or her iterations, and we want the commander to be a big part of this cutscene. Great, that is a wonderful decision for you to make.
Right.
So what does the rest of cinematics stop working on in order to have time to do that?
Right.
What does QA stop working on in
Correct.
order to have time to QA
Right.
this new? What do the other teams that are involved? What does audio stop working on? What other parts of the game have to be sacrificed to make that
Exactly.
call?
Right, because
Exactly.
we're not. I mean, ArenaNet's philosophy is like we're not about crunch. We're not gonna. It will be we are cutting something from the game and not you are sacrificing something in your
Right.
life. Like
Yes.
we're not going to
Da-Hee.
cut out our
I'm
family.
going to need you to come in on Saturday, maybe Sunday too. That'd be
face.
great.
Can I get a raise?
No.
See,
All right,
this
I'm
is
out.
an example. Wait, no, you're tethered. Hold on. I'm just gonna rip
Yep.
clothesline yourself. Yeah, but we are allowed to go home and eat food and sleep sometimes.
Right,
So
see our families and
yeah, we're
Yeah.
allowed to see our families. And so, yeah, that is the decision that gets made, is what gets cut from the game
Yes.
versus what can we do and still make this cinematic amazing.
right.
Because I feel like there's been an ongoing consensus that, and I'm going to backpat you just a little bit, there's been an ongoing consensus overall through our community that the cinematics, both in and out of game, are extremely good. And I know you guys work really, really hard, and it shows. But there are limits to time and workload.
Yep.
That
All
have to be
that.
acknowledged.
All that has to be balanced.
Yeah. So, do you guys want to answer some more questions?
Sure.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yes.
you can go, but you have to come back
I
on
love
Saturday.
questions.
Yes.
I love questions.
All right, well, I will let you guys take whichever ones we haven't touched on yet here.
Okay, so the first one, I don't know. Let's see. So on average, how much work is it to create a pre-rendered cinematic compared to an in-game one? Which one is easier to work with or to make? So I would definitely say pre-rendered is easier to make than in-game. There's some additional things I didn't quite touch upon other than like downstream teams having a little bit more workload for runtime cinematics. With pre-rendered, we also can do some more animation cheats and edit in post editing software instead of having to line up the animation perfectly in engine. Otherwise, you'll see a little bit of a pop if the character is not exactly lined up. And it's just nice to kind of like rearrange the character slightly to camera if necessary, and so
Helps
we can
compositions.
we can refine compositions better with pre-rendered. So there's also like a stylistic choice that goes with that. It allows us to be a little more I guess creative on the filmography side versus runtime. And so how much, let's see, it says work. I think I covered that. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'd
Yeah.
say.
And then what factors did you consider when deciding to use pre-rendered versus real-time? Covered that.
Well, one of the big factors too with pre-rendered versus real time is if we ever want to have the commander in there, it has to be real time.
That's true.
Right? Because I mean, we can't pre-render every possible iteration of the commander. That
Right.
would be
Do it.
monstrous.
That,
No.
No, that's what you're doing Saturday.
I see.
Can be
You
take
mean
longer than just
my
Saturday.
Saturday that is gonna stretch infinity hours long?
Yes.
Real quick before we get to the next one, I'm kind of watching the clock. We have a little bit of time. If we want to take a couple questions from chat, we can do that.
Oh, okay.
As we work through these. So,
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
go ahead.
We talked about the player character, so that's the next two there.
Yeah. Are
Yeah.
there any plans to incorporate the player commander
More
into more of the
questions.
cutscenes? That's why.
Yeah.
Okay, how much more difficult is a painterly cinematic compared to a more traditional cinematic using solely 3D models? I would say painterly is a more costly cinematic to make than 3D, just because we have to outsource the concept art or even like get time from the concept art team here to create those assets, and then they go into After Effects is the program we would use for that, and animate it, and it has a lot more iteration time. On average, those take about 8 months to make. Just one illustrated cinematic versus a 3D one could take us about 4 months if it's not having that player character or like a bigger, longer moment to it. So it's definitely needs more time. It has less input coming in though from different departments, so it's usually just like concept art and then the cinematic artist working on it, versus a 3D one has a lot more coordination between the effects team, the modeling team, the tech art team for rigging. So there's a little more involvement there, and like the environment team and lighting and all that.
Can we hit on what cinematics we are most proud of? Because
Yes.
that
Oh,
is
yeah.
a fun question.
What
we-
cinematics are you most proud of, and which were the most challenging?
Yeah.
I am really proud of Joko's victory. I thought, it was utilizing that new kind of technology of mocap, and it just everything about that worked great. Like, the monologue, the VO that came in, the animation put into it, the cameras, lighting, everything just really like came together. And I also really liked the episode 6 trailer. Like, I thought that was a challenge put onto the team, and it came out really well. So those two I am very proud of.
I noticed that all 6 of you looked a little broken when you said that with the episode 6. Everybody got like this little look on their face for just a second.
So it took a really long time. It was already a very depressing trailer to work on, but just imagine like we had the huge snowstorm, and then the event
that's
happened,
right.
and it was all in the middle of that. So that just like lengthened the amount of time that we spent on it. It was
And
a while.
I want to save that for Jason to talk more about, but I just remember we came out of the brainstorming session and I immediately went to Da-Hee, because I love teasing Da-Hee, and going, so, I signed you guys up for more animation work. You're
Yeah.
welcome. And then just walked away like the horrible boss that I am.
Yeah, because I was in the thick of doing the season 4 finale at the time, so it was
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, what about you? What's your favorite, and what was your biggest challenge?
I really liked the season 4 finale, which may be like a super, I don't know, typical answer, but it was beautiful. It was awesome.
fantastic.
I animated Aureen for the entire scene. So that was like kind of a point of pride for me. It was really the first time that I ever did quadruped creature animation. So like I felt very honored that the team trusted that I would be able to do that
Aw.
and pull it off. It was also like very stressful because at the time I was like, am I going to be able to finish this? Am I going to be able to pull it off? Is it going to look good? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it was really fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I think my favorite cinematic is probably the Joko cinematic also. It was a big undertaking, a lot of new technology that we used, and I think, like Chelsey said, just the quality that came out of it was really good. So proud of that one. I think the most challenging one that I've worked on has to be probably Dragonfall is what we called it. And that just, as you can imagine, working with a dragon that is the size of a continent is a very difficult task. And so that one had a lot of technical hurdles and was a challenging one to work on. So.
Wow, and I'm trying to pick a favorite, listening to all of you, and I was like, but they were all so good.
You have to choose one.
No, no is my answer. No, Joko's victory was probably the one that hit me the hardest because I remember it wasn't even like it was in one of its earlier iterations, and I still remember sitting at my desk watching that. And when Aureen came flying out of the side and just slammed in him, I jumped in my chair. And again, it wasn't even done yet.
Yeah.
That was the one that had the biggest impact on me.
That moment is actually a great example of how we collaborate with other teams. That Aureen animation, we had to, quote unquote, outsource. Insource is maybe a better term.
Yeah.
Local outsource. I don't
Yes.
know.
To the animation team, we had an animator on the in-game animation team do that animation for us.
Oh,
So,
wow.
Yeah. It's great when we're able to borrow time from them, but sometimes that's not always possible. And, yeah.
I got lucky that time. I'm
Yes.
so glad. All right. Well, we have about 5 minutes. So do you guys want to touch on some of those? One of them we have.
Yeah, I think we've.
The lip sync one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about which scenes we choose to do cinematics for?
Yeah. So nowadays, with narrative and design, focusing a lot on characters more for the story and everything.
It's okay.
It used to be like, okay, cinematics are all right. This moment could look cool. Let's do it. Not quite. Not that cool moments aren't cool because they are, because that's okay. But now it's more about what is the most emotional moment, right? Like what really is necessary to have that camera cut in closer to that character. Because let's say, for example, there's a tower exploding. In the past, that may have been a cinematic. But nowadays, you could do that in game. And sometimes it just feels more impactful to have this big explosion thing happening while your character's there watching it. So you feel like I have to react to this somehow. Versus, let's say you have, like Brahm and Air, like his mom returning. And if they're having this emotional moment and, if you're watching it just from the gameplay camera, you may miss maybe some of the facial expressions that's happening or some of the things that are being said without words on Brahm's face. And that is now kind of more of the focus with cinematics is what is the more impactful way to show these character stories?
Right. One kind of exception to that was the end of episode 5. I think it was episode 5.
Right.
Is this spoilers? whatever. If you haven't finished
there are
episode 5,
spoilers.
don't.
Right.
We spoil
listening.
things on the show a lot. We
Yeah.
just warn you, and it's fine, and then we move on.
Yeah. When you're walking down this long hallway to see at the end that marine,
It hurts so bad.
Yeah, right. That was originally going to be a cinematic moment, but the team did not have the budget for it. Essentially, we didn't have the time. So instead, we proposed that we create. We make it more of a cinematic moment that happens in game, like that the player plays through, and it ended up being like such a great decision that we made because it felt more impactful for the slow walk to happen all the way up until you see her, and the entire time you're hearing this like haunting echo of Timmy crying, and
Yeah, that one ended up. I'm so glad it worked out that way because having to interact and physically make that walk happen
Yeah.
made it so much more impactful.
Yeah. That was actually a decision I think we made earlier on.
Yeah.
Between like Tom and I can't remember who else was in that meeting, but talking about like cinematic versus really if it was in game, having the player forcing you to go down something a path that is difficult and you don't want to see that. I call those cin events, and that's kind of that trade-off between what is more powerful, having the player experience that with controls, even if they're limited, versus, all right, I get to just step back, put the controller down, it's just playing for me as a movie. And
Yeah.
I agree.
Right.
Like that moment,
It's something
So much
you're
more
a part
powerful
of
as an
rather
event.
than something that you're just watching.
yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Like sometimes emotional moments are better when you are just watching it, when the camera can get in really close, when we can kind of control the pacing and the timing and all that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's more impactful when the player gets to decide when all of that happens.
Yeah, this one worked out really well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I will say there are times a cinematic is chosen because there is no way to show it through gameplay. That there, like Dragonfall is a good example. If you while the player was still on, spoilers, Aurene, and
Just assume all spoilers.
yeah, and you've defeated Kraukatork and he's falling down through the mists, from the player's perspective at that point, you would just see Kraukatork falling through the portal and then have no idea what else was happening. And it all would have had to come through radio chatter. And so like there's a moment, even though it's not like, two characters having words spoken without words on their faces, showing that just to help the player understand like what happened after Kraukatork
Yeah.
fell through the mists.
That turned out really good. And I think we're going to talk about that in the second segment.
Yeah.
So, all right,
Cool.
we have time for one more if you want to or if we're good.
I think like the Painterly one I touched on briefly, which was more of even before I joined the team, like starting season 2 into Heart of Thorns, season 3, definitely by season 3, it was Painterly was about the past and visions and not about the present. So would we ever bring it back? I don't know. Just because like that's been the style guide. So there will be more Painterly, but it's just not if it's a present moment.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We need to take a quick break and then switch out to the next group of cinematics devs. So I will thank you guys all so much for all of your time. The past hour has been awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank
And
you, Ruby.
thank you all for hanging out. Stick around. We will be back in just a couple minutes. right, we are back, and segment 2 promises to be really interesting.
Should be fun.
I'll let you guys go down and introduce yourselves
All right,
and talk
okay.
about what you do for cinematics.
Oh, yeah, our names are not correct on there, but all right. I'm Jason Byfield.
Oh, no.
I'm the the cinematic marketing lead.
No, you're Chelsey.
So I work
Surprise,
on the.
you're a director.
Yeah, I'm well, yes, exactly. Perfect. Awesome. Promotion. I work on the marketing trailers, putting those together, and the main point of contact for those.
Okay, Chris?
I am Chris Burgess, and I am the cinematics audio lead. I'm technically a part of the audio team, but I'm sort of dedicated most of my time to shipping sound effects, VO, and music for these folks and making their stuff sound good.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Emilio. I am a producer here at ArenaNet. I produce the cinematics team and also the audio team.
Okay. So for segment 1, we focused largely on the Kate's branding cinematic, which was in-game. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the out-of-game, the marketing kind of trailers here. Which one are we using as our example this time?
So the example we're using for today is the Living World 4 Episode 6 trailer, which is the single shot, kind of exploring the moments between the end of Episode 5 and the beginning of Episode 6.
Our pain.
So, yeah, yes, exactly.
All right. Well, let's kind of do like we did last segment and walk through it in, I tried to say cinematic order. It's all cinematics all the time in my brain. In chronological order, where do you start when, okay, we have to do this thing? What happens first?
So the first thing that happens is we have a kickoff meeting, essentially, where we bring in our narrative team, we bring in audio, we bring in the lead designer for that episode, we bring in other marketing folks, and we all just kind of brainstorm and try to figure out what it is we want to do to market the episode that's going to be coming out. That includes tone, what features we want to show. Features became kind of a big thing, like what people wanted to see, like what is going to be coming out with the episode. And
I remember the conversation.
Yeah, it's become a bigger part of these trailers. For Episode 6, it was determined that we actually wanted to just kind of explore this moment in the story, and it doesn't happen in the episode. We knew that the Episode 6 was going to really kind of kick off right after Episode 5 ended, and there was this moment that we didn't really get to explore, which is like the grief that people are feeling from. Do we need to do spoilers anymore, or people know?
It's assumed.
Okay. So at the end of Episode 5, Irene dies. And we wanted to explore the grief that all these people that have been involved in her life are feeling at that moment. And so features kind of got less of a focus. It was decided that features would get less of a focus, and we just kind of keep this more exploring this moment in time.
Right. And that's always an interesting balancing act, because you do want to, everybody wants to know what's coming next. What's part of this new content? What am I going to get? But you don't want to spoil everything. I mean, you're going to be so mad if we show you this trailer before it's even out and be like, "Hey, she's back." Yeah. But what can we show? What can we do?
Right. And so for this particular episode, what we decided to do to kind of ride that line of people who are interested in the features still getting some information, and the people who are interested in story getting this moment, is that instead of our usual release schedule, which is the week before the episode launches, we held on this trailer until the end of the previous week, and then we front-loaded that with some smaller vignettes of features that would be happening in the episode. So everyone kind of got what they were looking for, hopefully.
Yeah.
So anyway, in this meeting that we have, this kickoff meeting, that kind of information is decided at that point in time. It's like, how are we going to treat this trailer? What's the tone going to be? Roughly, what are we going to be looking at? Who are the big players that are going to be involved as far as the work that's going to be needed to prep the world, prep props, effects, all of this audio, music, like all of this stuff that's going to have to happen for this. Who are the main points of contact? And then hopefully, if everything goes right, we leave that meeting with an idea, a rough idea of what we want, and then I'll go back and usually do a couple different treatments that people can look at and say, hey, I'm feeling this more than I'm feeling this, and we just kind of refine. And then Emilio, at that point in time, kind of kicks off our milestone schedule for at this point in time.
Here, hand that to Emilio.
Oh, sure.
So we can. That's the milestone schedule.
So yeah,
it's a little bit.
It's a lot of stuff.
A lot of it.
Do you wanna run through this? Like you were kind of instrumental in getting this all set up.
Yeah, sure.
This This is what it looks like. Well,
so-
that's us, but
Can we bring that back up real quick, Mark? Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks. So I actually started here last year as a summer intern, and I remember when I first came in, we're going through Scarab Ship and actually the Joko cinematic as well. And I was kind of just trying to get a feel for everyone and understanding how everyone organizes their stuff. One of the answers I got for how do you organize your tasks and like know what's coming up, they told me mental notes, and that's a problem. So
No.
yeah,
I am immediately stressed out hearing that.
it was bad. It was really bad.
I
No.
believe that's also called sneaker net.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was.
No.
It was terrible. But it was. Everyone had their own way of making things happen, and obviously cinematics were happening before, but
They
people-
needed a producer.
yeah, so they wouldn't be on fire. So I came in and tried to organize as much as I can. Jason was actually pretty good about having stuff behind his board and kind of like checklist of like,
Yeah.
oh, this is what's organized. And
In my previous job, I kind of had to produce myself quite a bit, and so I had kind of set up this initial outline of the different things I needed to hit in order to have a successful piece. And then Emilio was able to take that and run with it.
yeah, so I took the influence and I ran with it. Can I move this?
Yes.
Okay, so I had a couple things. So before at school, I would do things really physically. So I made this board where I was like, all right, these are the milestones. These are the general timelines of when things need to hit.
Wait, that was you?
Yeah, well, yeah, I made
Nice.
that on the board, yeah. It was pretty simple, just, color code it just to make sure where we were. I had a little fun with it. Those are like a certain gates, and those are the different mounts in the game to just show like where in the process we are and the dates that we need to hit to make sure that, we're going to finish on time. And yeah, it was pretty successful, but I realized I was the only one that was using the actual whiteboard. So I made everything digital, and that helped a lot. I have these... we have these basically these hubs for each one of the cinematics. This is one for Dragonfall, and basically I would set them up so it's a one-stop shop for each cinematic, where people could go in and figure out where they were in their schedule. Have storyboards up, any asset requests we're asking for other teams in the studio. Just a way to organize the team and make sure that we're doing okay.
Could you see a difference after you started doing that? As opposed to, it's just in my head, it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't. As a producer, my main goal is to make sure that everyone's able to go home and be satisfied with their work and see their families and live their life. And since I've been there, I feel like the team's been able to do that. So yeah, I feel happy about what I've been doing.
Awesome.
The
Right,
first
so-
few trailers that I did for Living World 4, I didn't have a very strong, like as detailed of a system that's displayed here. And so occasionally things like, checking with world art to make sure everything is looking proper as it should, in game, like that kind of stuff didn't always happen. And so like this made it really easy to be like, at this point in time, X, Y, and Z needs to be done. And so and we know that if X, Y, and Z hasn't happened by this time, what can we adjust in the front, above that, or in front of that to kind of get back on track. So it's really helpful. It's how I've always worked. I have to have some sort of like checklist of things.
Well, yeah, that absolutely makes sense.
Yeah.
And actually, something I noted on that whole checklist, that whole timeline that you had, what was the time frame that released in? Because it started like December 18th of last year.
That was a long one. Episode 6.
That was the episode 6
quite a
trailer.
time, yeah.
Yeah,
I think
so-
Da-Hee hit on it earlier, and like there was just a lot of things that happened during that period of time to kind of extend the production schedule on that piece. So,
That
or just
snowstorm
for
was
everything we
rough.
were working on at that time. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, some of these pieces do take quite a while, and that particular trailer was the first time that I had really done an extended kind of cinematic for these trailers. I've done small little ones here and there.
Really?
But I, the process is basically after that kickoff meeting, then I go back and start doing a layout for the scene. And that means using our proprietary tools and cameras in game to kind of sell this idea that has been percolating after that kickoff meeting. And so yeah, it was the first time that I really had done an extended amount of time in this, moving the camera around, adding props, adding characters, using our animation library to kind of rough approximate what it is that we're looking at. I think we actually have a version of one of the
Yeah,
earlier
let's look at the
ones up
early
here.
versions.
What do we do now?
Okay, we should talk about that.
So that was, kind of a rough. That's not quite the earliest version, but it's close enough to show how things are roughed in. Basically, it's a very similar camera path, not quite the same. The actions are completely different that we ended up with for the final product. But it does sell the idea of like the emotion of the scene, what we were trying to go for. The idea of each character is going to be selling us a different moment in grief. How each character kind of treats it a little bit differently. Using some sort of temporary audio track to help sell that emotion. That version had the final version because we don't have the rights to the temp track.
Yes.
But, yeah.
Some things we can't do externally.
Right.
I do want to touch on Timey and Gork's ears because you talked about that when we were watching the video, and I thought this was really interesting.
So you'll see later in the final version that Da-Hee, when she animated Timey, has some control, and she can lift her ear up a little bit and lifts her ear to kind of uncover her face to look at Bram.
Which just kills me.
There was actually a conversation we had about whether, do Azura have any sort of control over their ears, or are they just floppy and they just flop around? When we were watching that trailer, Chris was commenting about how all over the place Timey's ears were, and Gork's ears. So now I guess it's canon that they have a little bit of control. So whether that was intentional or not. But.
Well, there was a moment going back to the episode 6 cinematic where I think that was the cinematic. Da-Hee and I were talking about just the hand keying of all of that, and there was one point where Timey turned around and looked up, and her ears came up, and it's just those little touches that you notice.
Yeah. Did they show? I had to step out for a few times. Did we show the episode 6 trailer that has the comparison between early mocap and final?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, let's look at that now then.
Yeah.
In the book of Balthazar is written, war is life, and life is brief. Death comes. But death's not death that breathes life into others. And life's not life that never dares to risk. The world is loss and grief and faith and hope. Then take heart and rejoin the war eternal. For it may be that death is not the end, but possibly the end of the beginning.
So
I'm intimidated by how fancy that was.
we put a little production value into things sometimes. So
Sometimes.
so that piece is nice because it shows what they were talking about earlier about like how the initial mocap data kind of comes in and then how it looks when it's been polished and cleaned up. And then you can see each character, had whether it was utilized any mocap data or whether it was completely hand keyed, no mocap data. And there were quite a few characters that were like that Greg and Da-Hee were able to knock out and like really sell that emotion without relying on any sort of motion capture data. So it's a mix of stuff.
Yeah, so there's a big difference, and even though it's all little details, there's like a million of them between that initial render and that final setup. And what all does that take? Like
time.
I don't even I'm looking at that. I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, that flow chart that we saw earlier, where it's like review and then go back and add some stuff, review, just back and forth a ton of time.
Yeah.
And people throw out ideas or suggestions. We have meetings that are with a wider group that include narrative, that include effects or world art, or these guys that are involved, and they can make suggestions and that kind of thing. Or even utilize some of their time to help really polish an asset. So for this particular piece, there were a ton of people that were involved. We had custom props, we had custom effects, obviously custom animation. All of us are in a mocap suit, getting that stuff done. That map was utilized for episode 6, but it's a custom version of that map that has elements removed or moved around. I'm adding props from our props library. It's a lot of different disciplines that go into making these things and time that are required to put them together. So.
All right. So what happens?
I mean, obviously, audio and production, not to mention
Thank
those
you.
guys.
It's hurting cats.
Yeah.
It's hurting. Yes, that is the best production description I've heard. So what happens next in the process? Then where do you go?
So we've had our kickoff meeting. I've done a layout. We've had a bunch of reviews to kind of identify like what we want to do as far as the motion. That information is fed to our animators, and we do mocap sessions. We do to help nail the body animation, but obviously there's a lot of facial animation, and that's all hand keyed. There's no mocap for facial. We do so we've identified what character needs to hit what emotion. We try to identify what that action should be, and then that either gets roughed in or they just go ahead and start knocking out passes on the animation to get that in. And then it's just a ton of review. Chris, we'll start working on score. So Chris was heavily involved in that. He can talk about that if you want. I don't know.
You
Sure. Well, when it comes to the music process for marketing versus in-game is very different. And Jason makes it pretty easy with marketing because you usually have a very strong holistic creative vision, and you're coming to me saying, here's a piece of music, here's the emotion, and then I just have to say, okay, and we go from there. Thumbs up or thumbs down. In the case of this trailer, you had a piece of music that McLean had a piece of music that was already pretty similar to. It didn't quite hit some of the emotional beats that we wanted to in this trailer, which was more about the stages of grief and sort of this sense of loss. The original music was in the music we did for this trailer. Sorry, I don't know if we want to talk high level or just about the music for this trailer.
I would love to hear high level.
Yeah, I would too, actually.
I mean, it pretty much comes down to when I started working with this team a couple years ago, most of the music direction was like, I like this Michael Bay track from Transformers. And that happens a lot of time to musicians where you go on a gig and they say, we want Zelda, Chrono Trigger, and Nicki Minaj, go. And it just doesn't mean anything.
I'd like to hear what that sounds like.
Me too. Yeah. It's very confusing, and what that means is that the composer usually has to do a lot of throwaway revisions to sort of like guess what the client wants, and then they submit something and they say, we actually don't want that. So what I started doing is working closely with each cinematic artist on their piece and saying, can you describe what is happening in this scene? Whose point of view is it from? what is the emotion the audience is supposed to feel, and we get much more dramatic and emotional about it. So that way we can go to a composer who is a trained musician to do all this stuff and say it needs to be sad, then it needs to be happy, then it needs to be funny at all these different time markers. And yeah, occasionally we'll have a reference track that we'll pull up and say, and we like, if we pulled up Mad Max and we said, we like the drums in this song, so can you hit these emotional beats and do it sort of in the style of this piece we like? And that tries to nail down a very clear direction of, again, what emotional beats we need to hit, and if there are any visual cues. This felt more like a tone poem to me, where we just had the music kind of blow through until we get to the player character at the end, where we had these block chords that I think really kind of strike out the emotional connection between the player character and Irene in that moment.
And what was nice about those particular moments is that you had some flexibility that we could, delay when those kicked off to a specific point. And we kind of went back and forth on adjusting cameras and adjusting when those would come in to really sell this mood of what the commander is feeling at that point in time. So.
And again, part of marketing that makes it very easy with Jason is that a lot of times it is about the music drives the edit, and so you are always adjusting the edit to the picture. So the music has a little more liberty to be whatever it wants to be. Where in a in-game cinematic, if you think about like a Star Wars, a John Williams thing, it's just so intricately married to each edit and cut, and a lot of times the picture will not change to conform to the music, so the musician has to carefully time the music to work to picture, so that becomes a lot more intricate and can be a lot more work. I won't. They both have their difficult areas. So on a high level, there's a planning document that we go through, get the scene description, the emotional beats, any actual timed beats that the music needs to hit, and then we go from there. And again, it's all about revisions, getting things in, seeing how it feels. Sometimes we realize we got it totally wrong. But the fun part about that discussion, speaking about it dramatically, is it allows for, Kate's branding was a favorite for me that we got to, normally it's a fantasy game and we're talking about, other fantasy references, if it's Lord of the Rings or our own library. And in that moment, I think there was a word coming from Greg or Chelsey or someone that it was a feeling of being overwhelmed. We were very unsure of what was happening to Kate, whether this was good or bad. And I was listening to, I think the latest season of Stranger Things had come out, and I was listening to a lot of synthesizers, and M83 is this French electronic band that just does these overwhelming walls of synthesizers, and I put that against the picture just to joke around. And I was actually, I messaged Greg, I said, hey, come here, I want you to listen to something. And he's like, you're crazy, but...
Yes, but listen to this.
But like, actually... something here is working. And then we took that, McLean did the music for that scene, and we're like, look, obviously it can't be M83 and Stranger Things, but we like the feeling that this just droning thing. So the music really drove that scene as Kate is floating up in the air. He had this beautiful, like, searing tone. But sometimes that goofing around is where we get really some of the great ideas for, like, that actually can work. We can take this seriously. Or like on the episode 6 trailer, I think at one time I looked up New Orleans funeral music and put that to picture, and it was hilarious. It totally ruined the moment. So,
but even if stuff like that doesn't get used, it does kind of create this cascading effect of these guys are doing something really awesome and creative, and then while we might not be able to use it, we can at least feel inspired and creative off of that, and have maybe some different ideas will pop up that actually make it to the final cut. So
if you're having fun making what you're making, people are gonna have fun enjoying it.
Yeah,
that's something I started saying years ago. You can tell when the creators are having fun. You can tell when they're having a good time, and it's a joy to see.
Going back to just the emotional beats and like using and the music. Some of those meetings that we had back and forth when we were refining is we were trying to figure out what exactly each emotion for each character should be. and utilizing, you know, the vast knowledge of people who have been here since the beginning of the game and have been here since these characters were created and introduced in game, and relying on them to be like, well, I feel like Timmy would feel like this, or Bram would be acting like this, based on, you know, these events. And we did flip a few around, you know, and I did kind of an initial treatment that we saw earlier with the text, and not all of those ended up in the final product. And some characters were sharing, just based on, I wanted to have, you've heard the 5 stages of grief. There's actually an extended model called the 7 stages of grief, and I wanted to hit each one of those in this trailer. And that was the idea from kind of the beginning. And so, but we had 8 characters. So 2 of them had to share. Ritlock and Logan ended up sharing. But I think we ended up nailing it at the end. It gets some of them are a little more vague than others, but someone did bring up, I think, in one of the channels, one of the forums, about, oh, hey, I think these guys are going through different stages of grief here, and it was awesome to see, because it's like that was the goal, was to try to at least kind of express that. That was always the kind of underlying outline we were going for. So.
Yeah, watching someone get it.
Yeah,
feels really good. So, do 100 iterations.
Yes. So 10 iterations. Eventually, we say either we're out of time or it's good to go. So, and then that gets kicked over to Chris, and they get their kind of final passes in. Like, we've already had either early drafts of score, you know, sound effects, VO. In this case, there's no VO, and there's very limited sound effects that we're utilizing. It's mostly being driven by the music, and then Chris gets some time to work on that and finalize all of that content. By that time, all the stakeholders have hopefully had their eyes on and make sure there's no bugs, there's no, we're not utilizing effects that can't be used, that wouldn't make sense in this map or something like that. And then after audio is done with their pass, I get a final mix from them, and I apply it to the edit. Previous to that time, there have been alternate edits that have been created for our for localization. So we localize the VO in French and German, and then we do Spanish subtitles.
Yeah.
And then we also have cut downs that are also localized. So cut downs meaning it's a shorter version. You see that all the time with movie trailers. Like there'll be a shorter version of the edit, or some services only allow for a certain amount of time to play on a video. So there's usually a 30-second and a 15-second cut down. In this case, for episode 6, we really couldn't find a way to sell the story we were selling for the full version, and so there actually wasn't any cut downs. These were localized for the slates that you're seeing there, but there was no VO, so we didn't have to worry about that. But the full length plays for this piece only, no cut downs.
I was having this internal panic moment of, were there cut downs that I missed?
No, not
was
for.
I supposed to be using those?
Not for episode 6. No, this was because of just the uniqueness of this piece, and there wasn't really a way. For
where would you cut that down?
Yeah, and if you did cut it down, you wouldn't get the impact that you got, and so it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. So, well, do you guys have some more things you want to show or touch on, or do you want to answer some questions?
We can go back to play we haven't played the full version yet.
Oh, that's right. We need to do the final render.
Yeah, we can. For those who didn't get to see it when it was live.
Spoilers.
Yeah.
In the book of Balthazar is written, war is life, and life is brief. Death comes. But death's not death that breathes life into others. And life's not life that never dares to risk. world is loss and grief and faith and hope. Then take heart and rejoin the war eternal. For it may be that death is not the end, but possibly the end of the beginning.
Well done.
Yeah, that worked out pretty well. I do need to make a correction. I
Yeah.
said earlier there wasn't any VO, and I was wrong. What I was thinking was, is it diegetic? Like, is
It
that
would
the term?
be non-diegetic.
Non-diegetic. But what I was thinking was no diegetic. You're not seeing anybody talk.
Nobody had to work on lip flap.
Right.
Yeah, so
Correct.
it's easy VO.
Yes.
Yeah, didn't have to be synced to anything. It's my favorite kind.
And because we didn't really have, it was very sound effects light, we didn't really get a chance to talk
There are
about.
no sound effects. Yeah.
Well, there's the one, there's the whoosh.
There's the whoosh.
There's
There's the whoosh. I was really
Commander whoosh.
specific about the whoosh.
Yes.
When the player character walks by the screen, I was like, "There's got to be a big whoosh there of how empty the space is."
And that
because
was a
everybody's
point
so
of
sad.
contention. I was like a little bit like unsure, like should there be a whoosh if there's no other sound effects? But I did like it did. I think it sold the departure of the commander a lot better, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, and we're laughing, but it's a good illustration of the fine details that you put in there.
Well, we obsess. We go nuts. I mean, if we talk about previous trailers, like was it episode 5 where the player character gives the speech and the punch?
Yes.
Oh my god. So my first version of that, I just like put the biggest like explosion.
It was huge.
Just time to,
Picturing like
to
a Michael
kill.
Bay kind of
Yeah,
thing.
It was
was.
like if the Hulk had done it, right? Like,
Yeah. And it was like, no, you can't do that. And then I think I did a joke version with like a rubber ducky, like, but when we seriously
Amazing.
got into it, it's like trying to tune that to have this oomph, but also just feel right. And the same thing with the music in episode 6. I mean, it was sound effects light, which was another major conversation, and I think we ended up when you completely eliminate an element, speaking to the soundtrack for audio, in my experience, it's intimidating. It's like it takes some confidence to do that. And so we watched a few reference videos of other media that had done something similar, and there was just no sound effects, just the music. And we were like, okay, you know what? I think we can let this moment ride with the music and not feel like we have to detail every little thing, which would have distracted from this total headspace that we wanted the characters and the viewer to be in. Yeah, so I forget where I was going with that.
You're just talking about what you do. And
Yeah. It was brought up while we were watching that clip about story sound effects, which is sort of a newer term, I think, that we came up with internally, because there have been times where audio, a lot of times, if we talk about the whole process and not just the music, as soon as an animatic or storyboards are done, depending on what's needed, sound effects will jump in and do a first sound effects pass. And I'll throw in, I get on an audio finder search tool, and the first thing I find I just throw in there. So I spend a quick 30 minutes throwing in sound effects. Sometimes they're not great, but it sells the moment hopefully better for review when non-cinematics team members are watching this. And then there's a long period sometimes where I go away and work on in-game content, and then I come back in the last month and really do a fine polish pass where we record custom audio for everything. But what we found with that is sometimes, cinematics has those block diagrams or graphs where things get locked down. So now it's animation lock. And if I come in a month after that and say, oh, it'd be really great if Irene did this with her wings for just a little longer, it's like, well, we can't. It's too late. So at the planning stage, we have been trying to be better about identifying, hey, this is a moment where maybe we want somebody's mouth to be closely animated to the sound, and we have to do that in pre-production rather than waiting till the very end, so that animators are willing to work back and forth rather than saying like, well, it's too late. So again, a lot of cross-discipline collaboration and communication there, just to make sure that we can ship as high a quality product on every discipline as possible.
Yeah, I just can't stress enough how important that production schedule is. Like, it's just it's such an easy like cheat sheet at this stage, at this point in time, based on when we started or when we're shipping. We need to be here, and sometimes you have to. And I think most artists would say that they could continue working on things forever. There's always going to be little things that can be tweaked.
Yeah.
And at some point, you just have to draw the line. Like, no, we have to be done because this is going to affect other things down the pipe, not only on that project, but future projects.
Yeah, you're not working in a vacuum.
All right.
And it helps so much too, because on that list there'll also be points where it's like, all right, major feedback, we need to cut it off here. Minor feedback, we have to cut it off here. You're basically just watching them in reviews, right? Because that's exactly that. It's gonna affect the whole process, right? If we're gonna change the entire feel of a cinematic way down at the end of the pipeline, it's gonna hurt. Like, we're gonna have to
Yeah, and that goes back to, we were talking about, there are like 4 to 8 month pipelines on here. So if you suddenly decide, hey, we're going to do a 180, think about what that's doing.
Right.
What's it gonna cost?
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot.
I think it comes down to Emilio knows he has to come talk to me at the end of the pipeline, and he knows I like to complain a lot. So when he comes in with bad news, it's like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to talk to this guy.
Yeah.
He's in there just going, Chris isn't here right now.
Like, look, man, I'm sorry, but this has to happen.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
So after audio has done their pass on these
Yeah.
trailers, that gets kicked to me, and I render out the final versions, like I talked about. Those all get sent to the marketing team, usually Mark specifically, and then he loads those up on the various social media platforms, and when the day hits, then they go live. And you would think that would be the end of it, but it's not.
It is
There's
not.
more. But wait, there's more. For me specifically, at that point in time, once things have gone live, then I can archive the project, which there are some steps involved in that to make sure that we have a fully archived project that I can go back to if needed for content, or if there was let's say there was a bug that got through and we needed to do a really quick replacement shot. Fingers crossed it hasn't happened yet, but who knows, it could happen someday. I want to be able to open up that project with knowing that nothing is lost. I have everything I need to just replace that quick shot or grab whatever I need and then put it back away. That's my involvement. I know there are some future production steps that happen after that.
Yeah, we don't just like shoot it out the door. Now
Right.
we've forgotten about it until the end of
Right.
time.
Yeah. So we have to learn from what we've gone through, right? There's a lot of lessons that are to be learned from every single cinematic, because they're all unique problems. So we'll finish off a whole cinematic pipeline with retrospection.
Retrospective, I think, is what we decided
Retrospective
on.
is definitely the best word for that. Retrospective. This is a really early one. But yeah, basically we kind of come together at a team, get a room. Preferably, I like to do rooms that we usually don't meet in, because it's kind of like this is a space where you could just say everything, and like all of the vibes, either good or bad, could stay in that room
Really?
and not in anywhere else. I typically try to do that, but
Okay.
sometimes it doesn't work.
I didn't know that.
But yeah, it's a safe space to people to just be honest about the process. What did we do really well? What went not so well? Tried doing a new one actually this last time that was I thought it was pretty successful. It was the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the first people to get that actually was audio, but they'd come in and I had some like Western music going on.
Listen to some great Ennio Morricone.
Yeah, it was
It's
good.
fantastic.
Yeah, it was really good. But yeah, it was like the good, like what good things happened, who helped each other out. The bad, what went poorly that we had control of. Then the ugly, what external forces caused mishaps on our team, right? Because those are going to happen.
Yeah.
And then to wrap that all up, what are we going to learn from this, and how are we going to move forward?
Right.
And it's really helpful, honest look at ourselves so that we can keep improving.
Yeah.
It identifies a lot of like what we should continue doing and what is problematic, and hopefully we can address and change, and then we won't have to worry about it for the next version.
So yeah, how can we eliminate that issue and make it better for next time?
And I didn't mention either that production schedule, the milestone schedule, like that is in flux, like based on how what changes. Like other teams could change, like maybe the animation team, our outside animation team, is suddenly wants to be working on content a month earlier, and now we have to adjust for that. So like it's constantly a constantly changing thing, but if we didn't have it, like, that would be a nightmare to try to keep track of.
Oh, absolutely.
So, yeah.
They're all living documents, right? Because nothing's worse than somebody like jamming something down your throat and being like, "This is what you need to do because it's good for you." It's all these tools are there to help everybody else out. So I keep them as flexible as possible, and let them know, like, this is a tool for you. Like, how are we gonna get you clear of mind and be able to get your best work out on time? So. Yeah.
I have to say I love this so much because I've talked to producers who are like, "Oh, I don't really do anything." I was like, "You do everything. What are you talking about?"
Yeah,
that's just a bald lie.
It's hard. It's hard to define it because it's like, man, like every single day looks so drastically different of what I have to do, right? Can I show a picture? Sometimes I'll jump into the mocap space, which I love a lot, and we'll have fun with it. This was So I'm Kralkatoric. Is this up? Yeah. So I'm Kralkatoric and Da-Hee's Arene. And that was a previous cinematic artist that we had on the floor. But
amazing.
Yeah, we have fun with it, and it's cool. I like to say that I'm a digital stuntman sometimes for the trailers. Like if we're gonna show off, like I remember the roller beetle was the first one I did. I had to learn how to drive the motor beetle so that we could show it off in the like announced trailer that we're gonna have a roller beetle.
Yeah.
So I just practice at my desk, like.
I thought you meant in the mocap you had to learn how to drive the roller beetle.
Yeah,
an actual physical stunt.
There's a tricycle down there.
We have one in the basement. Yeah, it's pretty great.
Wow.
Pads. We're launching ourselves all over the place. It's fun. But yeah, Emilio's my go-to if I need to do any sort of in-game captures, and I need to really somebody who's knows the game well enough to be able to quickly iterate, because. I mean, for anyone who's done in-game captures before for YouTube or whatever, it is a process. Even if you have the tools that we'd have at our at our disposal, it still is a process. So.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, you guys, let's start with the first question that Group 1 had to answer.
Sure. So the first question is, what cinematics or cinematics are you most proud of? Which were most challenging? Oh man, personally. I think I am most proud of episode 6. There was a lot of firsts in that for me, personally, and I think it came out really well. What is the most challenging? There were a lot of technical things for episode 2 that were required.
And which one was that?
That was the split tone, where we started with kind of a heisty feel, and then we went into the more creepy Joko world afterwards.
That new version of Fear Not This Night.
Joko World. That's the new
worst theme park
your local
ever.
theme. Yeah, exactly. Or best, depending on how if you like Joko or not.
And at the end, you're awakened.
Yes, perfect. Love it. There were definitely some technical kind of. Challenges there on that one to get that working properly and to make that feel cohesive while being basically 2 separate trailers. So
yeah, that was honestly one of our most popular trailers. So I'm not going to speak for you in that it was all worth it. It was certainly a success.
Prior to episode 6, I would have said that was my most proud trailer that I'm most proud of.
It's my favorite.
Yeah,
I love it. How about you, Chris?
I feel like every cinematic brings its unique challenges, but something I struggled with over the course of season 4 was the fact that these scenes just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so the dragons, Arene versus Kralkatoric, where they have that dragon breath battle back and forth, and we wanted it to feel very visceral and violent, and I was like blowing straight into microphones, which sounds terrible if you've ever done it, but I made these sounds as big as I could, and then we got to the next episode, and we had Dragonfall, and I was like, and here's a bigger one, and I'm like, I don't know where to go from here. Like, I can't. And we figured it out. We did some fun stuff. And as far as favorites go, I mean, I think we all, where there are unique challenges, we find unique solutions to every cinematic and record fun content for each one to make it work. But if I had to choose a favorite, I could say Joko, but everybody already said that. I do really like what we did with the music in Kaith's branding. Yeah. So I'll say Kaith's branding.
I wanted to point out here that somebody had a comment about our Joko world.
Oh. People are dying to get into that park.
That's great. Good job.
For myself, so the one I'm most proud of, have to be the last trailer. Like, man, it was just like the emotional roller coaster that everything was happening in the studio and everything. I don't know. It was just it felt more than just the episode. It felt more than just the season finale. It felt like where we all were in a headspace.
Oh,
and,
yeah, big time.
It was really powerful. Like if there was one cinematic that I felt like we're putting ourselves into, it was that one. And I'm really proud of the work.
You should be.
Most challenging, man, I think it was it's probably Arene versus Krauk. Like there's just a lot of like interesting pieces in there. It was the first time we did like first person mocap, and then we had the Cine event right after. It was just so many different challenges and so many different like players around the studio that had to come together to make this, to sell this moment. It was crazy, but when it came out, I remember watching it like on live stream. And I was like, oh, somebody's finishing the episode. And like they're like, oh, what's gonna happen? And it was just like, oh, right there, like I know what's gonna happen. It was just watching them go through their like emotional roller coaster as we laid it out, and having to walk up and you see Irene the way she is and starts crying, and I'm like, yes, they cried.
we will never be done loving watching player reactions to the work that we do.
It's great.
It is fantastic, and I love it.
Yeah, that's why we do what we do.
Yeah, I mean, so many of us in the studio were waiting for people to finish that episode. And just, we're tabbing back and forth between live streams, going, where are they at?
Yep.
Yeah, it was a huge studio moment of finally getting that in front of the players.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was absolutely incredibly gratifying.
I think you got the next one.
Chris, this is you.
Is all the music synthetic with a capital S? Or
Stop
do
that.
you actually work... I like it. Work with an orchestra when recording music for the cinematics. So that depends on time and money, mostly. For expansions, they've done a lot of live recording. For Living World seasons, we typically don't do a lot of live music because it again, in the way that the cinematics team has talked about the whole mocap, capture, cleanup, hand keying, like there's just as much work on the music side to get to a live session with live players. You have to take, because it all starts with synthetic instruments in 2019 for the most part, unless you're John Williams, I assume. And then if you are choosing to go live, you have to extract that data into a sheet music program so the musicians can read it, and that data has to be cleaned up and conformed, because a lot of times we have to fake things that aren't real musical values to actually be readable. That has to go to a copyist who prints all that and tapes the pages so it's easy for the musicians to turn. Then you have to hire a contractor to hire all the musicians, book the space, hire the engineers and the mixing engineer and a dub stage to mix. And then it gets...
considered a producer.
Huh?
If you considered a producer... Because I'm overwhelmed.
Well, the music contractor would handle most of that. That they are like hey, we need to do this, and they say, you have X amount of money, I'll take care of it.
That's why it's expensive.
Yeah. Well, and those stages to have live players sitting there are expensive. So, to make a short story long, in season 4 for the final cinematic, and they did an overture after that cinematic where you're, spoilers, on the airship having a chat with everybody. They did get to do some live music for that, which was really, I think, a really nice touch for such an important moment, wrapping up the season. And again, that came from a place where we don't normally do live music for a Living World release, but it was a special moment, and we basically pitched that, I think, to Mike Z. We really want to do this. This is important. This is going to add a lot. And they said, okay, here's the money. But something like the other challenge is when we don't have the money to do that, it still has to sound real. The mock-ups, as we call them, which is all the synthetic instruments, have to be ship quality. So like the Living World 6 trailer, I performed and recorded all that, and it was 3 synthetic pianos layered together to really, it was really important for me to feel when you're sitting at a real piano, you can mic it a million different ways, and if you stick a microphone underneath the body, you get this really woody, thuddy, oaky sound. And I didn't have a real piano to go record on, and I'm not that great of a piano player, so I had to sort of do some editing. So again, that is a case of where we do use synthetic instruments, but we really obsess to make it sound as believable as we can. So it's a bit of both. Just depends on when we have the time and money.
I don't remember if it made it into the final version, but at one point in time for the episode 6 trailer, you had a sound you could actually hear the pedal coming. Is it the pedal that was coming off?
Yeah.
And it was awesome because it's just like you get that texture of what this is actually like to listen to live in person. So.
Well, I mean, if I don't know how much time we have. I can talk about that for half a second.
Yeah, you're okay.
There was a lot of when you do audio stuff, I get reference mixes, so I gathered 30 different audio tracks with pianos and saying, what do we want it to sound like? And what I found out is that, again, you can make a piano sound a lot of different ways. And I think what we ended up wanting it to feel was just very intimate, very dampened, because that's kind of the place the characters we were seeing were in. And part of that intimacy for me, it's not just about getting the microphone really close. It's about hearing the human sounds around the piano. You're hearing the bench creak. You're hearing the physical mechanics of a piano when you're pressing the pedal. There are big things that are happening inside a grand piano. So I wanted to make sure that those human sounds, it's like the musician was in the room with you. I didn't want it to be this overproduced, polished thing. I wanted them to be bleeding on the keys a little bit. So yeah, we go nuts thinking about how we can, what is the intent, what is the emotional intent of the scene, and how can the sound effects and music work together in a way to just drive that home for the viewer. Yeah.
Wow.
For the pre-rendered non-in-game cinematics, I would really love to know what kind of software is used to achieve similar cinematics. So we'll use a combination of a lot of different things. For the majority of the lifting, we're using our proprietary tools that are attached to our engine. That's for cameos, for cameras, and for bringing in characters and bringing in animation. All that stuff is done in this tool. Maya is, prior to that, Maya is being used. Motion Builder. For post-production stuff, we're using Adobe tools, so Premiere, After Effects, Photoshop, Illustrator, Media Encoder.
The whole suite.
Yeah. And then the final product, before it actually goes into the engine, is we use a tool called Bink to basically turn it into a video format that the engine can read. It's pretty commonly used across a lot of different projects, so a lot of different games. And then that gets checked in, and that's what you guys see. So. That's just for the visual side. Do you want to go over to, I guess, audio? You guys have your own tools as well, right?
What was I'm sorry,
The top one.
What tools
what
are
softwares
used?
do we use? Yeah. We use a DAW, a digital audio workstation called Nuendo. And that's pretty much our editor processor. We occasionally use 2-track editors like Isotope RX or what's Adobe's audio one? Audition.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got, and then we have plugins for these programs that are just, I couldn't list them all if I tried, but little proprietary programs like there's Paul Stretch, if anybody's heard of that. And then we get it into our game engine and do all the implementation on that side. Yeah.
you've got tools that you use too. Might as well cover them all. Let's just go for the little list.
Confluence and Jira are life.
Thanks, Atlassian.
Yeah, for real. Email. That helps a lot, yeah.
But obviously, like Word and Excel,
Yeah,
they're
for sure.
common office tools for that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, for sure. Excel.
Yes, Confluence and Jira.
Confluence and Jira. I like Confluence a lot because I don't know. I feel less that I'm like office monkey. Like Excel could feel very like.
That's fair.
Confluence feels like, all right, man. Like I'm curating a page for them to work through and.
Doing a thing.
Yeah, it's nice.
And recently, for internal review, video reviews, we've been using a service called Microsoft Stream, which is nice.
Yeah.
That allows us just to have like a one-stop shop that we can throw things that people can review across the company. So, without it's very similar to, I guess, YouTube kind of streaming video.
Yeah.
So.
All right. What else?
At what resolution do you guys render these pre-rendered cutscenes, and what video codec do you guys use? Excellent question. The resolution is kind of depending on if we are utilizing our cinematic aspect ratio, which is the letter bars. You see the black bar on top and bottom, or if we're going full frame. For full frame stuff, we're rendering at 1080p standard resolution, and then for the cinematic aspect ratio videos, we are rendering still 1080p-ish. It's just we're not rendering the black bars, essentially. We're just rendering only the video content to try to save space. We are limited on how big these video files can be, just due to limitations of the engine. And so we have to make sure we're trying to cram as much video data into that as possible. So when we go to actually bank, that sometimes it's a back and forth process to try to get as close to that limit as possible without breaking things. So that's the resolution. And the video codec, we're using a variety of intermediary codecs. So we're using ProRes, we're using DNx HD, we're using image sequences. It just kind of depends on what's supported at the time. Adobe and Apple like to kind of switch things up sometimes. So we have to be a little flexible there, and then the Bink has its own codec that it's using for the Bink file. So.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any chance that we will ever get 4K in-game cinematics, be it in-game or downloadable outside of the game? Very unlikely, just due to the size constraints that I was talking about. It doesn't make sense really for us to be going through the extra steps to get 4K and then squeezing it down into a 1080p window for the game.
Yeah.
So unlikely for that to happen.
We have time for one more.
Okay. Let's see. What do we got here?
Pick one.
How long does it take to finish the whole process of a cinematic creation, putting dialogues, sounds, music, and art together? Do you want to kind of tackle that?
It varies. It varies quite a lot. In those kickoff meetings, we're very clear about like, hey, this is exactly how much this is a projection using empirical data and what we have gone through before. This is what we project it to, and that's insane. So we shouldn't do this. We should probably bring it down.
Producer hat.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, I can only advise though. But yeah, they could take like 6 months. The longest ones before just like 8 months. Like they get really big. Right now we're at a pretty nice regular pace. We're supposed to be taking about like 4 months. With trailers like a little bit.
Yeah, the trailers are probably averaging about 3 months for Living World 4. But it depends on what's going on with the episode. It depends on how many different factions of art need to go into it. So it can. I've done as short as 2 months. I've gone as long as I think episode 6. It was like 5 months, something like that. So
2 months sounds terrifyingly short to me.
Yeah,
it's very short. Those are typically what we'll do for those is those will be very much feature heavy because those are a little easier to put together. You're not relying on having to create these intricate cinematics moments. So
yeah, but it's like it's a lot of work. You have like these like 2-minute pieces of video, but like a lot of work goes into it.
So much.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are kind of at time. So, is there anything else that you guys want to add before we wrap up?
I'm good.
Thanks for playing the game.
Yeah, thanks for
thank you so
playing.
much.
Thanks for your questions. Like really good questions, and thanks for watching the stream. I guess. So.
Yeah. Always thank you for
Hope
that.
it's interesting.
It was, definitely. All right, thank you guys. I will let you get back to work. I will let you guys get back to the game. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we will see you next
Bye,
time.
guys.
Take care.
Bye.